Hello and welcome to another video. This is Gina from McGuire. I'm always looking for ways to use my stamps together with my die cuts for a new look. Well, today we're going to do an inlay technique that allows you to get a really smooth look between your stamps and your die cuts. This technique works particularly well with background dies. However, I'll give you an example using a non-background die. I also like this technique with stamps that you have coordinating dies to go along with. So this will allow you to get more value out of those coordinating die sets. Okay, so let's start with this unicorn example where we have a background layered die cut and then we have a unicorn inlaid into the pattern. I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio Magical Christmas stamp set and coordinating die set. Now you'll notice these dies are very thin looking and I've had a lot of questions about that. It doesn't matter, they still die cut beautifully and hold up nicely. I'm using the MISTI stamping tool today simply because it helps me to line stamps up better. And I went ahead and die cut 2 unicorns. I originally was going to stamp 2 but only decided to do 1. Thought I'd share a trick with you also, another way to use your stamping tool and your coordinating dies with your stamps. I have a piece of scrap paper in my MISTI and I'm just stamping part of the unicorn onto this scrap paper. The unicorn stamp is broken up to a couple pieces so that you can stamp a scarf. That's why he's headless at the moment. So I'm taking the negative space of the die cut that I created and lining it up with my stamping that's on the scrap paper. Now I can pop in my die cut and stamp it, and I'll know that my stamping will be perfectly centered right on that die cut. If you have trouble stamping and then die cutting with the coordinating dies, and you have trouble lining it up that way, this is a good alternative. Next, I'm going to stamp the head of the unicorn and just make sure that it stamps okay in the center. Once I'm happy with it, I'll pop the die cut back in place, stamp the head, and then we have that perfectly positioned. So this technique of using the negative space to help you position your stamping and your die cut perfectly is a technique that I know many people like, so I thought I'd use it in today's video just to do a little reminder. I completed the stamping of the unicorn and added some basic coloring. Now it's time for the background. I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio Fancy Floral 1 and 2 dies. These dies can be used separately or layered together, and they are just so much fun. I'm going to cut them from 2 different shades of light pink cardstock and layer them together. I'll be using the Gemini Junior to die cut these because my Gemini Junior always cuts through background dies beautifully with no trouble at all. However, you can use these dies with any machine. I like to switch between machines in my videos just to show that both machines are good ones. There are quite a few great die cut machines out there. After I have these 2 die cut, I'll pop out all of the little pieces. They come out easily. And then to show you a little trick to clean up all those little pieces and to keep from having a mess on my desk and floor, I have a Handvac on my desk where I can just quickly suck all those little pieces up and keep from having a bigger mess. Okay, so now we have these 2 pieces. You can see how beautiful they are layered together. And you can use them separately and they still have a great look to it. So I'll use Gina Connect, this is a strong liquid adhesive, to glue these 2 layers together. I like to go around the outside edge and then a few points here and there along the background. A little bit of this glue will hold well. So once I've put these 2 pieces together, I want to die cut a window for my unicorn die cut to pop into, to lay inside of it for an inlay look. So I've got the coordinating die, and I'll just die cut right through those 2 background layers. This will cut through no problem. It's a nice sharp die, so I don't have to worry about it cutting through the 2 layers. Putting a little purple tape down just to make sure it doesn't shift. Again, I'll put it through my die cut machine. So what will happen is we will inlay the unicorn into this background piece. It looks kind of funny here, but once we put the whole card together, it just gives a really cool, smooth look. Okay, so now I'm going to adhere this to a white 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. However, I wanted a little white trim around the edge. Those background dies cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, but there's some room on the edge, so you can have the option of cutting a little bit of it off, as I am here. I like having that option. So in the end, this ends up being a little bigger than 4 by 5 1/4. I'm again putting liquid adhesive on the back of the layers, and I'll add that to my white note card. I then can glue the unicorn in place and it'll pop in like a puzzle piece. Now normally on this card I would probably use foam tape to add the unicorn, to pop them up, but that does add bulk, and sometimes you need to add extra postage if it's too bulky. So this is a great option to give it a really cool look. Instead of just gluing it on flat, you have it inlaid, and you don't have to worry about the bulk. Now this stamp set is kind of a Christmas set, but I wanted to show you that you could use it all year round. So I'm adding a "You Are the Best" sentiment. I put liquid adhesive on the back of it, and I use my T-ruler to make sure that I glue it down straight. I also wanted to show you some of the little things that I do to add details to a card. On the horn of the unicorn, I'm adding a Stardust glitter pen. That adds a lot of sparkle. On the mane and the tail of the unicorn, I'm using my Aqua Shimmer pen, which adds a little bit less of a shimmer look. It's not as much, and it keeps the color behind it true. For the eye, I use a Sakura black glaze pen, which just gives it a teeny bit of dimension and lots of shine. And then for the white dots on the scarf, I'm using tiny little drops of white Nuvo drops. Little accents like this don't take much time and make a big difference on a card. In this case, none of them really add any bulk. I did add a few gems to the background, and here you can see how the unicorn is part of the background. It lays in it like a puzzle piece, so you get this really smooth look. It looks really cool in real life and is another way to incorporate your stamps into your die cutting. And by the way, the "You Are Best" sentiment is from this beautiful Pinkfresh Studio floral frame stamp set. I've used a stamp set similar to this from Pinkfresh Studio, and I'll link to that video here in case you're looking for ideas on how to use this set. It's a great one, and I like the sentiments. Okay, for my next example, I'm not inlaying my stamping. However, I am using a background die to create interest behind my stamping, and it really helps to pull everything together. For this, I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio A Day in the City stamp set. That's the set on the right. I wanted to show you on the left is the home for the holidays. So there's two versions. One is all occasion and one is holiday. The holiday one has little wreaths and lights you can put on the house, really fun. But I'm still looking for non-holiday cards this time of year, so I thought I would focus on a birthday card. I like how the Pinkfresh Studio Cityscape die really fits nicely with both of these stamp sets. So I'm cutting this from white cardstock, and then I will want to add some interest to that white piece instead of keeping it plain. So I have the Pinkfresh Geo Leaf background die. I'm going to tape my die cut piece behind this, and we're going to make an impression of this die or emboss with this die. This time I'm using my Big Shot just to change things up. You can do this with your other machine. I'm setting the machine up as I would using an embossing folder, but instead I have an embossing mat. This mat has a little give to it. I'll put the paper on top of that, then the die, and I'll run it through. This causes the die to make an impression in my paper or emboss it instead of cutting it. This piece is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so I decided to trim it down a little bit again and add it to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch pool note card, and a little trim will show around the edge. So basically this embossing or this impression we made on the white cardstock will just add a little bit of interest to this background. So I stamped a bunch of images from the A Day in the City stamp set, and I colored them easily and quickly with Copic markers, and now I'm adding them into place with foam tape. This time I want a little bit of dimension, and that texture in the background adds a lot to it also. I have some trees that I added, a few clouds, a banner that says happy birthday, and even a little sunshine. Now, as I mentioned before, I like to add little details to a card. Those details can make a big difference. In this case, I'm putting glossy accents on all of the windows of the buildings. It really doesn't take that long. You just squeeze a little bit out and kind of move it with the tip of the bottle, and it catches the light nicely when it dries. I also used a newer Aqua Shimmer pen. This is a little bit different than the shimmer pens that I normally use. Normally I use a regular shimmer pen, which just adds shine without color. This one's called Midas Touch, and it has shimmer in it that's like a gold. It is really cool, and it worked perfect on this sunshine. So here's the completed card. You can see that impression or the embossing on the background adds lots of texture. We have the shine on the windows, and we have that sparkle on the sunshine. All of these things together make the card extra special. I think it's worth putting in the little extra time for all of those details. And remember, you could make a holiday version of this card by using the Home for the Holiday stamp set. You could put snowflakes, a Christmas tree, a snowman. It has all the pieces to build a scene. Okay, my next example uses the impression or the embossing on the background, like our last one, but with an inlaid stamped image. I'm using the adorable Pinkfresh Studio Squirrel Friends stamp set. This is a holiday stamp set. However, you could use those squirrels and have them hold hands for a non-holiday card. But I decided to make this one a Christmas card. So I'm stamping the squirrel onto scrap paper, just like I did before. I use the coordinating die to cut from some cardstock. I'm lining up the negative space with the stamped image, popping in the die cut, and then stamping again. And I'll be sure that that is stamped perfectly on that die cut. Next, I'll randomly stamp that little squirrel on my scrap paper, line up the die cut again, pop my white die cut in its place, stamp the little squirrel, and then we can move on and do the sled and all the other pieces. And by the way, if you don't have a stamping tool, you can still use these stamps and just stamp them by looking through the acrylic block every time you stamp to make sure you get good placement. Okay, I colored my little squirrel image, and now I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of white cardstock, and I die cut the squirrel shape from it also. Now with this negative space, I'm going to make that impression or emboss another background die. This is the Pinkfresh Studio Geo Floral background die. This is a beautiful one. I'll just tape that in place. Again, set my die cut machine up as if I were using an embossing folder. I'll put my embossing mat down instead. Put the paper down on top of that, then the die, run this through. Because we have that embossing mat, the die will make an impression on the paper instead of cutting it. And now we have that fun texture on the background. But we still have an opening to add our stamped image into. I decided to put a white backing behind this in case some color shows through. And I'll add my little squirrel die cut right into the opening so it fits in like a puzzle piece. And then I can add this on to my 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch pool note card. But first I'll put a piece of craft foam between. By adding craft foam between, we'll have some added dimension. I'm again using the black glaze pen for the eyes. I almost always do this on any critter eyes. I just kind of dab the pen right onto the eye up and down, and that forces more of the fluid to come out and makes it stand out even more. On my critters, I also like to use my R30 Copic Marker and just touch it to where the cheeks are to give a little bit of rose color. And then finally, I'm using my Aqua Shimmer pen to add a little shimmer to the cheeks and to his scarf. So here you have the finished card. I can't get over how adorable these cute little squirrels are. I did add some gemstones to look like snowflakes falling in the background. And here you can see the texture we got with that background die by making that impression, but the cool effect that we get by having the stamped image inlaid. Now that squirrel stamp set comes with this beautiful sentiment that I think is great for a Christmas card. You could use it on the front of the card, but I didn't have room, so I used it on the inside. And on the front, I used a simple merry and bright message from this Pinkfresh Studio Great Joy stamp set. Okay, I have another example of doing an inlay technique with your stamping into a die cut background. So here I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio Fruitastic stamp set. I've been wanting to use this for a while. I thought the apples were so cute and the sentiments are fun. So I'm stamping the apple onto a piece of scrap paper. I have a negative space of the coordinating die cut that I'm lining up with the stamped apple. And then I will put the die cut right into place, and then I can stamp this. Now I wanted 4 apples for this one, so I can easily go through and stamp these, and I don't have to worry about lining up the coordinating die afterwards. Since we did this little trick of using the negative space of the coordinating die as a little spot to hold our die cuts, it saves us a lot of time in the long run. So even though this isn't a trick that I normally do with my stamping, it is one that I do when I want to stamp a bunch of the same images on a die cut. Now each of the stamped images I am stamping with a red ink, then I am slightly putting some dark ink on the bottom edge of the stamp and stamping it again. That's how I'm getting that two-tone look. Then I will go through and stamp the little leaves at the top. Next I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of white cardstock, and I'll die cut the apple window 4 times on the front of this, for the 4 places I want my apples to sit. Next, I'll die cut this piece with the Pinkfresh Studio Geo Floral background die. So I'll die cut this and it'll look funny with these apple openings, but it'll look good once we put the apples in their place. So I'll just pop all of those tiny little pieces out and then put a liquid adhesive along the back of this. Make sure that you put adhesive real close to those apple die cut openings because you want to make sure those pieces lay flat and stick to the card also. I wanted this to be white on white, so I glued that onto a white piece of cardstock. And now we can glue our little apple die cuts into each place. And again, they will fit in like a puzzle piece, so you'll have a nice smooth look. I think this inlaid look of the stamps in that background die cut is a fun alternative to just putting them on with regular adhesive or with foam tape. To finish off the card, I put the piece onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch red note card, and I put 2 stamped greetings in the center. I added brown to the stems with a brown marker and 3 little white dots with a white gel pen onto each of the apples. You can see how the apples are inlaid perfectly. The sentiments are from the Pinkfresh Studio Bloom stamp set. I like the sentiments in the stamp set because there's a bold basic greeting and then little messages you can put along with it underneath. I like to put sentiment strips on my card, so I like that I can team these up so I can have 2 strips, or I can put the smaller sentiment on the inside of the card. Okay, my last example is another where you can do a simple inlay with a non-background die. Now this is a Pinkfresh Studio die that I've been wanting to use for some time. I die cut a bunch and popped out the little pieces. I also die cut one and didn't pop out the pieces, put lots of glue on the back of it, and I'm gluing it to some white cardstock. So you'll see all the little pieces are intact, so I can just add some color to this very quickly. So I'm putting reds, orange, yellows. I've got the colors listed on the top, kind of doing a rainbow from the outside or from the inside out. So because I left those little pieces in there, I can then add a white die cut with the pieces out of it and the color will show through. So this is a fast way to add color to those little pieces without having to color them individually. I did this in a video recently and I'll link to it here if you want to check it out. I did a stained glass technique like this. Okay, you want to heat set this because we're going to add glue on top. It's always good to make sure your paper is dry from the markers before you add glue. Now from one of my little intricate die cuts, I'm going to die cut a small circle from the center. What's cool is I can use the outside piece on this card and the fun little piece that comes out of the center on another card. I'll set this aside and first add 3 white die cuts, as you see here, putting adhesive here and there on the back, and I'll put this on top of my coloring, lining it up with the die cut below that has all the color on it. So you can see how clean and pretty it looks now. So I'll put 3 on top like this. So I stack 3 on top of each other, just putting liquid glue between each. Then it's time for the one that has the hole cut from the center. Again, be sure you put liquid adhesive around that center edge. Pop that on top. And then we have an opening to add a solid circle where we have our greeting. It's simple. We could have just glued the solid circle on top, but that one extra step of die cutting that opening so we can inlay it really gives a cool result. So I'll cut the extra off of our backing and we have this fun piece to add to a card. In that center spot, I have a white circle die cut where I stamped a greeting from this Pinkfresh Studio Pretty Paisley stamp set. It's a fun building stamp set where you can create large paisley patterns, but I just use this sentiment that says "You are my favorite." I added that to a 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 white note card. Very simple, but that smooth look you get where that circle is inlaid in the center is really fun. All right, so there's a bunch of ways to kind of look at your stamps and die cuts differently and how you can work them together. I hope you are inspired by it. I list all of the supplies in that YouTube description below. And I have much more information over on my blog, so you can check that out on the top right. In the middle are a couple other videos you might like. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you have some time to craft today, and we'll see you again soon.